morning, sun. How are you? Skies above. Gee, it's great to be alive and love. Good, good, good morning, sun. Good, good, good morning. Good morning. Good morning, sun. How are you? Skies above. Gee, it's great to be alive and love. Good, good, good morning, sun. Good morning, life. Good morning, sun. How are you? Skies above. Gee, it's great to be alive and love. Good morning, sun. Good morning, sun.
Is this the right button? I think so. Is this thing working? Greetings. There we go. Okay. Okay. Looks like we are live. And good morning to you all. It is December 29th, almost end of the year. And here we are. Greetings, Mo. Here we are at the end of a year. Done quite a few of these, so kind of crazy. Episode 83 of I Need Coffee was the result of me fixing a bug in an old application. And this sent me on a journey of contemplation, self-reflection, and humility. I originally had a different idea for a title, but after further thought and introspection, I think this might be a more appropriate title. So, Contemplating Technical Debt and Continuous Improvement. Very formal sounding name, but I think that's the correct term. So, let's talk about that. So, 8 years, 10 months, and 21 days ago, I apparently, as far as I could tell, is when I first released an application, which kind of turned into two different versions of a product that I continue to sell. So I have two products that I sell. This is in the Dynamics GP realm. So they've been around for a while, and it's just kind of a utility that fills a very specific niche that no one else seems to have addressed. So I have been selling that. Now, I've since learned a couple other people address it. I don't know how they do it, but I'm still selling this product. It seems to be useful to people. I currently have to maintain 15 versions of these two products because of the nature of the on-prem world in Dynamics GP and customers being on older versions. So I have a system where with a single click, I can compile and build 15 different versions of this application. So with every release, I have to, push those out, which is fun. Over the 8 years, 10 months, and 21 days, I've had 39 releases of this application, which isn't a ton, but it's more than a few. And I've sold it to, it looks like over 200 customers. Some of those are kind of licensing arrangements where someone is able to offer it to all their customers. And so I don't know the total count, but it's somewhere over 200. And I've done all this part-time. It's like very part-time. So I only sell maybe one or two of these a month, something like that. And so if you look at that 10-year calendar, that's a long time. Now, what is interesting about this process is the kind of the cycle over the years. And it's like, I release, I find a bug. It's like, okay, yep, I see that bug. So I'll fix that bug and then I'll push a new release. And I'll be like, okay, great, I got it handled. Well, then a customer says, well, we're doing it this way, which we would normally do with this window or this screen in the application. Can your product do that? I'm like, yep, that's a reasonable request. I should probably handle that. So I will add an enhancement and then I'll prepare a new release. So then I'll find a different bug and then I'll release and repeat. So you do this for 8 years and you start to have a process of accretion, shall we say, where the code kind of builds up and complexity generally increases. Let's put it that way. After 8 years, your application isn't typically simpler or smaller than when you started. So it always seems like there is always a bug. And I call them latent bugs, right? You may never encounter them. They may never become apparent. You may never find them, and you may go along for years perfectly happy thinking your code is bug-free. But I pretty much accepted there is always a bug. So the bug that spawned this whole discussion and thought process is in March 2021, someone contacted me and said, Steve, I'm trying to use your application to do this, but it's not working the way I would expect. And I looked into it, and it turned out that this customer had an edge case where I'll call it a bug because it's a legitimate process, but they were the first customer in 8 years to use this particular situation, and that was their business process. And I'm like, that is interesting. So after 8 years, this one customer encountered this one scenario that my application did not handle properly. So I'm like, okay. So I look into this and I modify the code to handle this edge case and essentially fix the bug in my application where that was not being properly handled. I thought, okay, good. It's all set. I'm done. My application is good, right? Not so fast. December 2021, like 2 weeks ago, customer contacts me and says, I'm getting this error when I try to do this. And they said, I've tried this, and I've tried this, and I still get the error. And I look into it, and I'm like, Turns out it was caused by a regression bug that was introduced by my March 2021 bug fix. So I added logic to fix the edge case and handle the edge case for that one customer. Turns out that I was not as careful as I should have been, and that by supporting that edge case, I actually introduced a regression bug that caused a different 1% use case to stop working properly. I added some validation that prevented this customer from using this 1% use case. Like, oh boy. So I see it, and it's like, yep, that was my mistake. So how do I deal with this? So I'm going through figuring out how to deal with this 1% use case. And at this point, I'm just like, look, this application is over 8 years old. It's for the Dynamics GP market. I am not going to invest 40 hours into this 1%, fixing the regression bug that is now preventing a 1% use case from occurring. So I'm just going to fix it however I can. So while trying to do that, I discover an edge case for the 1% use case. And I'm just like, nope, I give up. I'm not going to handle this. So the scenario is if this customer has their 1% use case, and there's the edge case where they have two transactions with the same, I'll call it a document number. That's the lingo from the Dynamics GP world. My application is unable to tell which of the multiple documents it should work with. So it could have, technically, there could be 5 transactions that have the same document number, different dollar amounts, different dates, and the customer says, oh, work with this document. My application says, I've got 5. What? I can't tell which one you want me to work with. And there's no reasonable or easy way for them to tell my application which one to work with. So I'm like, okay, this is an edge case for a 1% use case, a 1% business process. I'm just not going to handle this. And so I put in logic to detect that edge case and say, look, I simply do not handle this scenario. I give the customer the information they need to say, look, you need to solve this situation manually. So I say, look, there are 5 transactions with the same document number. I'm not designed to handle this scenario. So look, good for you. You're in the 99.9 percentile for your business process. Knock yourself out. Handle this manually. So it's like, wow, I'm really digging deep into these weird scenarios. And that's what happens like after 8 years, right? You've handled 99%, everything's fine. But now you're getting into these really obscure situations, and that's really the only time you need to dig into the code. So I was like, okay. And it was really messy fixing my March 2021 things. I thought I did okay. But in December 2021, finding this regression bug, like, I made several mistakes. Like, I have some design problems, and my March 2021 fix that introduced the regression bug, not pretty. Like, looking back, I'm like, yeah, that was not done well. Now, time constraints, focus constraints, like I didn't see the scope of the code and its ramifications. And so that's why, let's see, one moment. So that's why I just I made some mistakes. So anyway, so that was one. And that got me thinking about another application. So this application was supported over 6 years, 2 months, and 23 days. That's quite a while in the software dev world. And I'll ignore this first bullet point and get back to that. It had 63 releases over 6 years. It was constantly changing because the customer was constantly changing. Dozens of new features, literally hundreds of changes that we implemented over those 6 years in order to deal with this rapidly changing business that was using it. It processed millions of transactions, millions of requests from their internal systems. It implemented, like, the scenarios we had to deal with required millisecond level logging because it was being called from a cluster of servers. And we once had to identify that the customer had a bug calling this application in that we noticed simultaneous requests, duplicate requests coming in 3 milliseconds apart. And the customer was convinced it was a bug in our application. It required millisecond level logging for me to prove that it was actually a bug in their application, submitting duplicate requests to my application. So this is like the level of complexity involved. It was pretty crazy. Over those 6 years, the entire development platform that I was using when we started, ASP.NET, whatever version it was literally obsoleted. And so it's like, nope, that's deprecated. And I'm like, okay, we have a problem. And we could try to upgrade, but there's time and expense. We could try to move to the new platform like ASP.NET Core, but we're having to interact with older components that are no longer supported or that are not supported by the latest ASP.NET Core platform. So we're kind of stuck. So over that span, the technology moved on and we're kind of stuck with these tools that can't be easily upgraded. So regardless of the complications of the application, we had some technical challenges there because Microsoft is moving faster than the businesses can sustain. And then this was an integration with a payment platform, and the customer then wanted to move to an entirely new payment platform. And literally everything about the solution was oriented about connecting an ERP system to a payment platform and all the weird quirks that go on with this specific payment platform. When you swap in a new payment platform, like it's a different solution. Like you don't just change your connectors to that platform. Like you could potentially architect it to have some abstraction, but just the design concepts, the objects, the processing, what used to be one step in the old platform is 4 steps in the new platform. Just completely different design methodology between the two platforms. And so it effectively had to be rewritten from scratch, which was probably a good thing given just how complex it had become. So, and back to the first bullet point, it started with a new platform that was brand new to me. And as a result, I had a bad design from the beginning. So I was painting myself into a corner over the course of 6 years, 2 months, and 23 days. And that was rough. By the end, it became painful to maintain this application. So one might say, you should have refactored, Steve. I don't disagree, but exactly when do you choose to refactor? This was a customer solution, and they're paying the bills, and I could have refactored, but the customer would not have seen, in that particular case, in a couple of these cases, the customer would not see any benefit. Be the same functionality, but all the effort goes into redesigning, re-architecting, fixing the issues, improving, maybe moving to the newer platform. Maybe there's some side benefits, but day to day, the end result is the application works exactly the same from the customer's perspective. So exactly when do you make that choice? When do you cross that threshold where you say, now is the time to refactor. Now is the good time to refactor. Now is the best time to refactor. We better refactor now before we get further down and get into trouble. And we now have the budget to refactor. We now have the time to refactor, right? So there's time, there's expense. If you refactor, you will likely have regression bugs, right? So you need more testing. And at some point, like that prior application, circumstances conspire to the point where it's like, okay, even if we would have refactored along the way, we're at a point where a complete rewrite kind of makes sense. And you just get to a point where you need to bite the bullet. So that actually happened. So I'm wondering, like, when sometimes it's not obvious when the refactor needs to occur. And I'd love to know what those signs are. In a very simple case, I have a very simple practice where if I'm using the same chunk of code in 2 places, I recognize that and I say, let me pull this out to a function, procedure, method, whatever you want to call it in your language, and I need to move this out because I'm literally repeating the same 8 lines in 2 places. Got it. Time to push that out to its own dedicated method. But when you have logic that starts branching and it's like, it's just one if statement. And then you have a nested if statement. And then you have a second if statement on your main if statement. And then you have multiple if statements that branch and you have 5 branches. And you're like, ooh, I should probably refactor that. But the amount of time, by the time you get into that, you're like, we didn't budget that. So when do you refactor? I don't know. I'd love to know, but sometimes you get to a point where you see that you need to refactor, you should have refactored before, but it's not always obvious at the time when you would have ideally refactored. So this got me thinking. Fixing regression bugs, supporting 8-year-old code. So I was thinking when, you'll see all these posts or articles or tweets about, the Google interview or developer interviews where you're asked to develop a certain type of sorting algorithm, which I think is kind of preposterous, at least for what I do in business applications. Maybe, at certain level that makes sense, but, I'm not writing device drivers. I'm not writing hardware, firmware. So the technical developer interview questions seem kind of not terribly relevant to me and what I do. So I was thinking, well, instead of asking tricky technical questions during a development interview, how about you ask this business application developer to show you some code that they wrote 10 years ago and have been maintaining for 10 years? And in my experience, that would be a very interesting job interview discussion. And I think that you'll quickly see how good they were and how good they are. And in my case, I wouldn't get the job because I'd pull up my 8-year-old code, someone would take one look at it and say, yeah, nice try. But I wrote that 8 years ago, and that code was ported from VB and was a mess at the time. I didn't clean it up. I just slapped it together because I didn't realize it would still be around in 8+ years. So yeah, but anyway, it's a very humbling experience looking at that. But to my credit, so good meme, it's the worst code I've ever run or ever seen. And the Jack Sparrow response is, but it does run. And it does run. And, the 200+ customers using it, they're like, yeah, works for me. They don't see the 12 branches and if statements buried in the code to handle these edge cases and 1% use cases and bug fixes. Like, it's functional. Is it fun supporting it? No. So it's really like, I'm the only one that sees it and has to deal with the scariness behind the scenes, but it does work. So technical debt. Where is the technical debt? Well, you say, well, Steve, you need to focus on clean code. Okay, I don't disagree. But really, is clean code really the issue? Or is it more refactoring? Say, well, you should have refactored. Yes, you have some messy code, but really your problem is at the next step up, that you should have refactored and kind of cleaned up this section here and pushed this out to different methods and, kind of made your code more modular and maintainable. It's like, okay, yeah, I could do that. But is that really the problem? Someone else say, you have a design issue. You can have clean code and you can refactor, but fundamentally, you have a bad design. Like, look at this. You didn't use this design pattern here and this design pattern there. Yep, I don't disagree. So then, aside from the design pattern, someone says, well, you can use all the design patterns you want, but your architecture is, you're going to be constrained by your architecture and you're going to run against that wall. It's like, okay, so you have an architecture limitation. Well, what guides your architecture? Well, did you properly consider the requirements of this solution? Well, 8 years ago, no. I didn't know what some of these things were. Like, I didn't know that some of these things existed, these use cases. And in the 8 years of supporting this, the ERP application also changed. So the requirements change. So it's a moving target. So requirements are not this static thing. They change over time. It's like, okay, new business processes come up. And it's like, okay, this never existed before. It exists now, and we need to accommodate it. So it's not a static thing. And so it's like you have ancillary discussions of scope. Well, you originally thought you would handle this. Now you're handling this. It's a different solution that you're providing. And if you're doing a customer engagement, you have a statement of work. Well, did you properly consider that in the statement of work? Was it clear what was in scope, what was out of scope? Did you make your assumptions clear? Was everyone in agreement on what was being delivered here? And then there's business process. Like, well, it was this then, it's this now. The process has changed. The business has changed. What they needed to do is changing. And then, well, was it communicated? Maybe there was a miscommunication. I said this, I thought this, and maybe that wasn't clear. It was misunderstood. Maybe when I said that, the customer interpreted it as something different. So there's all sorts of places where you can, get into trouble here. So how do you deal with this? How do you get out of this technical debt in all of these categories? Well, you can try and learn, and you can try to reduce your technical debt. And so I have a bunch of these books. Should I read these books? Even if I read these books, can I catch up? Can I improve my business analysis skills? Sure. Can I retain those business analysis skills while improving my estimating and planning skills? Maybe. Can I improve my ability to provide specifications? Perhaps. Can I improve my project management practices and techniques? I'm starting to juggle. Well, what about my software engineering capabilities? Because I often interface between the consulting and business application and customer side and development. So, there's some skill sets there. Well, then you move into some of the development stuff. Well, Steve, you really ought to have some good automated testing practices in your business-centered development. I don't disagree. There's a book on that, by the way. And then there's design patterns. Which design patterns are you using? Do you have clean code? So there's this huge, either a funnel or a pyramid of knowledge that you're working off of. And it's like, where are your limits? Are you able to juggle all of this stuff? Even if I think I can handle this and improve this and have this knowledge, what about the rest of my team? Like, I'm having to interface with other people, some on the functional or application side, some on the development side, technical side. Are they keeping up? So, real struggle. And so, is there a limit to all this knowledge? So I previously worked with .NET and had a lot of experience with .NET framework. I was by no means an expert, but I was able to get the job done. Then I worked with ASP.NET. Well, then Microsoft says, well, .NET framework, that's just old news. We need to come up with something entirely new that's effectively different, no longer compatible, and we're going to call that .NET Core. And ASP.NET needs to also have a rewrite, so let's call that ASP.NET Core. Well, now there's a whole bunch of confusion and there's limitations and constraints, so we need to come up with something called .NET Standard, which I still don't understand. And now they've gone to something called .NET 5.0 to further confuse everyone. And if you are dealing with .NET framework dependencies, good luck trying to figure out whether you can still interoperate with those things using any of the new .NET Core, .NET Standard, or .NET 5.0 platforms. And I don't really need much of the architecture that these offer because I work in a Windows-only world. I'm not doing I'm not supporting Linux and Mac and Windows and who knows what else out there, IoT. Like, I just don't need this functionality in my business application world. So it's getting crazy, and the platforms are changing faster than I or my customers can possibly keep up. And there's very little value in that. So it's a treadmill. So let's push it to Business Central. So we have Business Central. We've got an application, and I'm just talking about the SaaS. There are folks that are supporting Nav on-prem, Business Central on-prem, all sorts of history there that they've got to support. And then there's this thing called Business Central SaaS or Business Central Online. Like, you gotta get with the current times now, right? There's version 18, 19, 20, 21. It's just this constant treadmill that's churning, and there's always going to be that new release, new features, new functionality, changes, breaking changes, new code practices. So the AL language is changing. Well, you got VS Code and Docker. Those are constantly changing, constantly breaking, giving me headaches. And I just want to produce solutions. I don't want to be fighting VS Code and Docker. There's APIs and OAuth, right? It's a lot. Just in that domain, there's a lot to learn. So AJ Kaufman has become an expert in that area. And it's like, man, that's another training class, 2 training classes I've taken from him to just try to keep up and barely understand how to deal with that. Well, as I mentioned, there's automated testing. There's application insights. Are you properly implementing application insights and telemetry in your Business Central code? Then there's AppSource, an entire universe of knowledge getting published in AppSource and doing that work in DevOps pipelines and AL run validation. All this stuff, which we're getting through those hurdles. And then there's monetizations. Like, okay, we're in AppSource, but we don't have our monetization solution figured out. Oh boy. And we're doing Power BI work. And then maybe we need some Power Automate. And there are all sorts of Azure dependencies. There's Azure for App Insights. There's Azure Storage. There's Azure Key Vault. So, you need to know these things. There's Azure, an app registration that you might need for APIs and OAuth. Then there's third-party SaaS applications that you may need to integrate with, along with just data integrations. Maybe it's loading data. Maybe it's receiving data from a third party. And this whole time, we're juggling project management, right? So I've had calls with customers, calls with our application consulting and sales team, and talking with them about the solution they want for a customization for Business Central. So it's okay, we're juggling application functionality, the customization, their business process, their requirements, what they say they need now, trying to anticipate what they need tomorrow, and how that's all going to fit into the realm of Business Central. And, so we have proposals. I have to write proposals. It's like, I have to wordsmith stuff. I have to make sure I'm accurately and comprehensively writing all this down so that what I communicate to the customer is accurate, it's complete, it's comprehensive, it's covering our bases and CYA so that, we don't get blamed for omitting or making a mistake. And we've got to account for all this. We have an accounting system. We have job costing. We have product support, right? How do we support that? We need a CRM system, a help desk system. And then we have all our internal systems, file sharing, email, phone calls, website, all that stuff. So there's a lot going on. And how do you deal with that, the limits of your knowledge? So then I look to, in one case, because this is kind of the visible stuff, I don't see what other organizations are doing with PTEs, right? So I can't tell what, the hundreds of other partners and customers are doing for their internal development or their custom development. But we can take a look at AppSource. And I wonder, if I look at any one of these applications, how together are these? Do they really have all this stuff handled? And I wonder, 100% of them statistically can't possibly have everything buttoned down and perfect. And I know of direct reports from several of these AppSource solutions that they do not have things handled. They developed a couple years ago when BC SaaS was new. They utilized the best that they could at the time, being brand new to Business Central, being brand new to AppSource, being brand new to AL, and they are already in trouble. So they have architecture issues, they have design issues, they have code issues, they have everything, refactoring issues, monetization issues. So all of those things have conspired against them over just 2 years that they're in a pickle. And so supporting those applications is already becoming a problem. And in the meantime, the BC team is churning out new releases, right? So they're having to struggle to get those new releases and get them working with the latest version of BC. And if they don't have the automated testing, they don't have the good DevOps pipelines, they don't have those best practices in place, boy, they are going to struggle. And they'll need to refactor, right? Or rewrite. And what is the economic case for that when you only have 20 customers so far for your Business Central app and they're only paying $50 or $100 a month? It's just, you have a legacy app at that point. So interesting. So I don't have any great conclusions. These are more just a whole bunch of questions that I wonder about, and I try to discuss with my colleagues in our organization and figure out, well, how do we do better? How do we try and avoid the mistakes? How do we learn? How do we improve? How do we implement some best practices and basically avoid doing things wrong, avoid making the mistakes, avoid getting in trouble? And if we just avoid the mistakes, I mean, that's half the battle. We don't have to necessarily do everything perfectly, but if we can avoid some of the glaring mistakes that will make our life painful in the future, we're probably in the top 10%. It doesn't take much based on what I've seen. So yeah, I'm open to suggestions, discussions of how you deal with this. It is a mountain, and my brain only has so much capacity, my attention span. I've got other things to do, right? I've got work to do, bills to pay, customers to support on existing stuff. And this is all new stuff that I'm trying to produce. And I can't stop working on that to focus on this. And even if I did, how many hours in the day would it take to get through those books, improve the skills? And even if I could read those books, I wouldn't necessarily be good at it, right? So maybe I'm just not as good as I really need to be in business analysis. Maybe my software estimation skills just are always going to be lacking, and I'm always going to be, mediocre at best at that. And maybe my application architecture and application design skills, maybe I'm just not an expert in that realm, and I need to leave that to someone else. But I'm the one having to say, craft the statement of work, define the scope, figure out what the assumptions are, and come up with an estimate. So I kind of need to know some of those skills and work with the developers to come up with a plan. So it's challenging. Anyway, so open to ideas, suggestions, conversations on how do you do this? And I'm a small team. I'm in a small organization. I don't have 50 people where we can have meetings with 15 people that can represent everything from business analysis to sales to marketing to, proposal writing and to quality assurance to development. I don't have one person to handle every single segment of the business. It's just a couple of us trying to wear many hats. And so how do we make this happen? Anyway, that's what goes through my brain, rattles around in my brain on a Tuesday evening and comes up with these discussions. So with that, Happy New Year. Maybe some room for some New Year's resolutions if you're into those kind of things. Yeah, what do you think about technical debt and continuous improvement? Like, how do you pause and say, I really need, I've got a deficiency here. And that's half the problem is like swallowing the pride and saying, maybe I'm not quite good enough in this area. And instead of getting defensive and saying, oh, they did something wrong, it's like, maybe I need to improve here. How do you do that? And then what do you do next? How do you find the time to read that book, to take that class, to improve and retain that skill? Maybe it's something you only do every 6 months. And this happens to me constantly. I'll learn something 3 months later. I don't do it enough, so I can't maintain the proficiency in that realm. How do you do it? I'd love to know. And so with that, Happy New Year. Here's to an auspicious 2022 if we can still maintain optimism. So cheers, Happy New Year, and I will talk to you next year. Okay, have a good one.
Good morning, sun. How are you? Skies above, jeeps